Hello everyone, welcome back to the Salem witch trials. We just finished the part where Cotton Mather had wrote his book, in particular stating that the evidence was simply not enough to be convicting witches. So why then did Cotton Mather write his book? And in particular, why did he defend the use of spectral evidence when earlier he had urged caution to its use? Such as when writing to John Richards and composing for all the judges the return of several ministers consulted. The answer is that the witchcraft outbreak had blossomed into a political crisis, and Governor Phipps, as well as Deputy Governor Stoughton and the rest of the witchcraft judges, who were all also members of the Governor's Council, needed Cotton to carry out spin control. Despite his earlier efforts at moderation, the young Mather was now willing to compromise his actual beliefs in this evidence because he had become convinced that the fate of Puritan colony itself was completely at stake. Mather's gloss was needed to protect the fragile administration of Phipps, a close political ally of the Mathers and a member of their church. Phipps and Increase Mather had arrived in Boston from London only the previous May to commence the government under Massachusetts' new Royal Charter of 1691. No one knew what might happen if Phipps' government failed. Perhaps Andros or some other military governor might return, again threatening the liberties of the colony and its Puritan church. With Massachusetts beset with internal political division and locked in a desperate military struggle with the French and their native allies, a public acknowledgement that the judicial system had wrongly executed 19 people, pressed to death another, and imprisoned well over 100 more would be brought down. And it would. The new government would be brought down. Threatened the existence of the whole city upon a hill dream. Cotton acknowledged in wonders, "I have indeed set myself to countermine the whole plot of the devil against New England, in every branch of it," and he believed that the witchcraft outbreak was part of a process that might bring the Puritan experiment to an end. Regardless, Governor Phipps had what he needed to defend the witch trials and bring the Court of Iron Termina to an end. With the wonders of the invisible world now published, he could call for a ban on future publications and squelch any further questioning of the judges or the government. A copy of the book travelled to London on the same ship that carried Phipps' letter to Blaithwaite about the ban. To avoid any confusion about its status in regard to the prohibition, the reverse of the title page of Wonders announced that it had been published by the special command of His Excellency, the Governor of the province of Massachusetts Bay in New England. It would be reprinted in London, where it would be taken as the official account of the trials. Once he returned from Maine, Phipps brought an end to the court. When questioned during the October 29 session of the legislature as to whether the Court of Iron Termina would stand or fall, Governor Phipps said it must fall. There would be no more sessions of the court. Many have praised Phipps for his good judgment in the matter. Phipps does deserve credit for bringing the trials to an end in the face of opposition from many, including the Deputy Governor. However, his actions were guided by a series of political, legal, and personal considerations that were sometimes self-serving. Phipps had created and ended the Court of Iron Termina and ultimately had the power to pardon those it had convicted. Phipps' circumstances and motives are worth exploring, for they illuminate the politics behind the witch trials. In 1692, Sir William Phipps was perhaps the most famous English colonist living in the Americas. Born and raised on what Cotton Mather referred to as a despicable plantation on the coast of Maine, he sought refuge in Boston during King Philip's War. Trained as a shipbuilder, he became a ship's captain, and in 1687 he raised the cargo of Spanish treasure galleon, valued at more than £200,000, winning him instant fame and fortune. It was an immense sum. The more than £68,000 of silver and £25 of gold would be worth in excess of 20 million today. James II was so elated with this huge windfall for the crown and the nation that he knighted Phipps, the first man born in America to receive such an honour. Returning to Boston, Phipps soon allied himself with the Mathers and became a member of their North Church. Its success brought high officers, including command of military expeditions against Acadia and Quebec in 1690. While the attack on Acadia did result in the capture of the Port Royal, the much larger Quebec expedition accomplished none of its goals and was deemed a disaster, his reputation compromised. Phipps then returned to London, where he worked with Increase Mather to gain a new charter for Massachusetts. His reward was his appointment as the royal governor under the new charter of 1691. Despite his high office, Phipps was more of a bare-knuckle street politician than a polished diplomat. A man of no formal schooling, he was the best partially literate. His religious credentials were not strong, either so, as he became Puritan saint. He did it in only 1690, a move that seemed more politically than spiritually inspired. Phipps was a remarkable man. Through savvy and hard work, he personified the architectural type rags to riches story. Still, the background ill prepared him for the difficult challenge that greeted him and Increase Mather when they arrived in Boston with a new charter in May 1692. Not only was there the witchcraft outbreak and a war that was going really badly, but many were upset that Mather and Phipps brought an entirely new royal charter rather than one that restored previous conditions. The new charter was, in reality, a substantial political accomplishment, giving the colony considerable freedom, but some leading conservative politicians of the colony refused to accept it, believing it did not provide enough freedom. Meanwhile, royalists, who had supposed Dudley and Andros, were at best lukewarm to the changes. So Phipps governed a divided central general court, where he had only limited support. When Phipps returned from London, it was clear that immediate action was called for to deal with the witchcraft crisis. Hence, rather than wait for the General Court to meet the following month, he created the Court of Oyer and Termina without its consent. Technically, therefore, this was an illegal court, at least until the legislature met and approved it, for the new charter did not allow the governor to form it. Indeed, this restriction had in fact been a victory for Mather and Phipps in their negotiations. Andros had held this arbitrary power under the Dominion and used it to his great advantage. That Phipps would resort to such an extreme measure shows the great concern he and Mather must have about the witchcraft outbreak. The court was always a temporary expedient, one Phipps wanted to eliminate as soon as possible, as it lent credence to the fears of his opponents about the wide powers held by royal governor under the terms of the new charter. As the head of a new and factionalized government, Phipps could not risk alienating the colony's important politicians. More than that, he needed to establish a reputation as a proponent of law and order. Corwin, Hathorne and Gedney were key Salem politicians who had already been involved in the trials. Phipps did not dare snub these men by denying them a place on the Court of Oyer and Termina, even though they had all demonstrated a willingness to believe in the validity of spectral evidence, about which, of course, Phipps' allies, the Mathers, had serious reservations. Phipps had personal reasons as well for backing an aggressive court. His half-brother, Philip White, lived in Beverley and had a sick child who Dr. Toothaker said was under an evil hand. Despite being the uncle of an afflicted child, Sir William and his wife, Lady Mary, both had good reason to fear that they themselves might come under suspicion of witchcraft. Mary had a relative who had been accused in Maine a few years earlier, and witchcraft was believed to travel in families. Witches were often considered to be barren, and, well, the Phippses, they had no children. They shared their home with two servants, who was Sir William's manservant as well, and the Catholic daughter of Baron St. Castin and his Wabanaki Princess Bride. The girl was a prisoner of war Phipps had captured when he seized Port Royal, Arcadia, in 1690, so therefore she was kind of slaved into marriage, let's say. It was a most peculiar family, headed by Sir William, the recent convert to Puritanism. Phipps had been a successful treasure hunter, an occupation that required divination to find the riches, and also the ability to charm monsters believed to protect them. He had also had his fortune told, as Cotton Mather would later reveal in his biography. While these were all acts of white magic, they were the devil's work nonetheless. Furthermore, Phipps would have been perceived to have the same taint of familiarity with Native Americans known to the judges. He had been raised on the coast of Maine, where his playmates included Wabanaki children. He and Mary both had relatives in Falmouth, where they had been parishioners of George Burroughs. Phipps had connections to other outsiders too. Sir William was later accused of associating with pirates, and after taking Port Royal, he had been an outspoken champion of the rights of Arcadians as English subjects, including some who would later prove to be French spies. Phipps, therefore, dared not be seen as soft on witchcraft, nor did he want to be particularly close to it. He was happy to turn the proceedings over to Deputy Governor Stoughton so that he could focus his efforts on the military crisis and the challenge of passing a new legal code through a legislature that was increasingly divided. Despite spending 5 or 6 weeks in Maine leading the war effort in the late summer and fall, Phipps was present in Boston during all the meetings of the Court of Warren Termina, except for its September session. He could have played a much more active role in the proceedings had he wanted to, but he even turned over the authority to sign the death warrants to Stoughton. Not only did Phipps avoid the proceedings, but when he first reported the witchcraft outbreak to the Crown, he dissembled about his whereabouts, suggesting that he had been off in Maine and shocked upon his return to find what a poor job Stoughton had done in his absence. By lying to his superiors in London, and by commissioning Cotton Mather's whitewash of the affair and then immediately imposing a publications ban, Phipps was following public opinion. While even educated people still believed that witches were real, most were becoming increasingly convinced that some innocent people had definitely died. This was greater than a moral outrage. It was a doctrinal corruption. According to Puritan theology, someone who commits a sin must confess it before God. The state's sin should have been acknowledged publicly. Failure to do so jeopardized the Puritans' special covenant with God, and indeed the very foundation of their belief. It was an open invitation to bring down God's wrath on individuals and the entire colony. Yet, admitting to the commissions of sin would lead to equally dire consequences. If the state acknowledged the wrongful death or imprisonment of more than 150 innocent citizens, the new government would lose all authority. The king would be forced to recall Governor Phipps, the charter would be lost, and Massachusetts might wind up with another Andros. It would be the end of Massachusetts a Puritan colony. Mather and Phipps had decided that, at least for this special moment, the government was more important than the covenant, for without the government there would be no covenant. It was a decision that would be long remembered. The suppression of the truth by Phipps and Cotton Mather and others had turned Massachusetts City from a city upon a hill, ruled by divine ordination, to an entity governed by political expedient, and for that reason alone, the Salem witch trials became a pivotal moment in American history. The witch crisis was the end of the Puritan covenant, or at least the beginning of the end. And that is the next part of the Salem witch trials. Thank you for joining us, members and anyone on the podcast. When we come back, we shall continue right where we left off. So as you can see, it was definitely more a political movement. And, those people, they were innocent. They didn't deserve what they got, but they weren't going to admit that, were they? So, yeah, kind of sad. Many blessings.